My name is David Cobb. I use he, him gender pronouns. I'm coming at you from unceded Wiyot territory, where I have the honor of working for the Wiyot tribe on Dishkama Humboldt, which is not only an indigenous led, but a truly indigenous controlled community land trust. I want to take a moment to frame that this is called Decolonizing Economics, the third annual post-capitalism conference. To really underscore, this is in fact the third post-capitalism conference, and the Wiyot tribe were participants at the first two. But as Michelle Vassal, the Wiyot tribal administrator, often says, we're moving at the speed of trust. And we're moving faster now because we trust each other and we've got such a long history. And as we have been developing the relationship, she invited me to make a presentation directly to the Wiyot tribe, tribal council, that is government. And I did, and made a request that the Wiyot tribal government consider co-anchoring, not just participating, but co-anchoring this conference, this summit. And the Wiyot tribal chair, Ted Hernandez, made a motion. It was unanimously supported by the entire tribal council. So and in the course of that work, we literally pushed ourselves to say, yes, post-capitalism, but what would decolonizing actually look like? And I want to end by just saying out loud how it literally warms my heart to imagine the idea of a government literally voting to co-anchor something called a post-capitalism conference. Nicola, Sam, can we make sure that we're being recorded here? Because I feel like we are not.
We are currently being recorded. We're all good, David. Thanks for checking out.
I didn't see that. So with that, I am actually going to go in this order: Mel Figueroa, Kali Akuno, Nicola Walters. With regrets, Surin Mudliar, who was one of the panelists, is ill and is not going to be able to join us. But first, I want to we'll have each of the three panelists share some thoughts. The three of them will have a dialogue that the rest of us will be watching, and then I will be calling on folks who want to join the conversation. So use the raise hand function, and I'll bring you into the conversation. So first, we'll hear from Milicia Figueroa. Mel is a longtime social justice organizer. I actually met her when she was the press director for the Stein Baraka campaign. I had the honor of being the campaign manager. So we were comrades in arms in that motion, and have basically been rolling deep ever since. Mel is a radical geographer, a real get shit done lady, and I am excited to turn it over to Mel Figueroa.
All right, thanks, David. It's good to be here today. David asked me to kind of frame the conversation by, we're talking about sort of the intersections between settler colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, and how we put all of that in context, right? So I'm a geographer, so I love maps. So it's my best language is maps. So I'm going to show a few maps for you just to situate where we are, in 2022 in the modern day, in the last, or the, death row stages of capitalism, global capitalism. I don't know if it's time to pronounce that yet, but sort of how we got here. And, when we've been in this, more or less system of all those oppressions for about 500 years now. And so, when 500 years is a long time, it's hard to imagine anything else. But I'm inviting you right now to let's take a little time machine and look at how things, look at sort of alternatives we're going to re-examine, sort of the world we know in light of other worlds as well. So, all right, I just put this together, so I hope this works. Okay, so we're going to look at what did the world look like let's take a time machine, go all the way back to 1491. And I use this projection. This is called the good projection because it's probably the most accurate in terms of looking at the actual comparative landmass of the Earth when it comes to the spherical shape of the globe. I think most of us know. Thankfully, it's more common knowledge than it was when I was growing up. That flat map, that Mercator map, actually distorts it so that Europe looks larger and Africa looks smaller. So this is like the most approximate we can get in terms of, how the actual surface of the Earth looks in comparison to each other. And that's important because when we think about what did a world economy look like in 1491, and most of you might be like, the heck, world economy? World economy didn't exist. It's all primitive. 1491, everybody was like, Game of Thrones or something like that. But what I want to say is that actually, if we go outside European and Eurocentric history, the picture of the world is actually a lot more diverse and well credit for a lot of the time. So we start with the Americas, or at that point called Turtle Island and Abya. Turtle Island looked like this, right? It was a plethora, an incredible diversity of indigenous nations, right? That traded with one another, that had all kinds of economies, cities, all sorts of cultures, and that were all connected in an economy. So I have this is coming from another presentation, so I'm just highlighting a few of these diversity of societies just to show you, kind of give that picture of what the world looked like. So you here have the Taino, which was the first indigenous nation to have contact with that dude, Columbus.
Mel, I've lost you.
Oh, I thought it was me. I was trying to change headphones. Yeah, Mel, we
Can
lost
you
your
hear me
sound.
now?
Yes, we got you back.
Okay, great. Okay, something happened with my mic. I'm sorry. So there's a Haudenosaunee. They're the Iroquois Confederacy, democratically organized group of 6 nations. Then you have, oops. There we go. Over here, where I sit right now is occupied Mechoopda territory. And so the Mechoopda was one of many nations in a language group called the Maidu that lives in Northeast, what we now call California. Then you have, of course, the Triple Alliance and the Aztec Empire, which in the Valley of Mexico. Again, just to kind of reiterate the point, right? The first impression that the Spaniards had of looking at Teotihuacan, the capital city of the Triple Alliance, was that it far surpassed any city that they had in Europe. Then you have Abya, also known as South America today. And there were, of course, the Incas and a whole plethora of native nations that lived in the Amazon basin as well. Africa was, again, still that diversity, a patchwork, a mosaic of various kingdoms, which again had had a lot of status in the global economy at the time. Actually, you had Mansa Musa in the Mali Empire, who at the time was considered the richest man in the world, including Europe and including all of these other nations. You had the great Zimbabwe, which Wakanda was modeled after in Black Panther. Then you had the whole of the Eurasian continent, right? And at this time, you had the Silk Road, right? I call the Silk Road the most interesting place you've never heard of, because nobody teaches us about Central Asia except oil and bombs. We're bombing that place right now, but nobody really understands the rich history of it being a trading route that connected cultures all along it, from China to the modern day Balkans, right? You had the Ottoman and Mamluk empires, the Muslim societies, you had Chinese dynasties, you had the Vijayanagara Empire in south of the of the thing. And this, not to say that, you know, of course, empires existed before capitalism, before this thing. But what I'm trying to show is that, you know, there is a diversity of societies, a diversity of economies, and you had a diversity of political forms, right? It wasn't all just one, but that all of these were also connected via trade. And so it was like, you know, people, and this was about like a mercantile trade, right? So, you know, societies took care of their own self-sufficiency and traded the surplus, right? You have the folks where my people ended up originally were from in the Majapahit Empire in Indonesia, that then migrated to the Philippines. And then, of course, you had some of the oldest societies in the world in the Australian um, uh, 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 continent, and also in Aotearoa, now known as New Zealand. So in the context, right, of everything that was going on in the world, little Europe up here looks kind of, you know, puny in context. And in fact, you know, in the 1400s, Europe was a relative backwater to these vibrant global economies that were coming up all over, that were, you know, more or less linked, that were, there was no big superpower. It was more of like a multilateral type of organization. So what changes, right? And you know, people think about, okay, what is capitalism? Is capitalism just like, I'm going to profit off of you? Not necessarily. When we think of any ism, we have to look at the word that is the root of the word before the ism, right? What is capital? Right? David and I go into this all the time, right? Is capital just like, ooh, I got cash, you know? Not really, right? Capital is about investment, right? So in order for these small little principalities in Europe to go and conquer the world, they needed capital, right? And so what did they do? They actually transformed their own society, right? They kicked out the peasants through the enclosure movement. They made land alienable to buy and sell so they could have cash. Why do they need cash? Because they need cash to buy ships and men and guns and cannons and whatever the hell they needed to go, and to go out and get more in the first wave, gold and silver, and then raw materials afterwards, to be able to again make that return on their investment, keep and then keep that system expanding and going. Okay, so this is another sort of comparative I want you to hold in your mind, that, you know, this 1491 world was about that mercantile trading economy, right? It's like, okay, I have enough to eat, but I got the surplus, so, you know, I'm going to trade some of that for something else that I want from somebody else, right? But you know, and then there was currency, but there were many currencies. And then but when we switch from an economy like that to an economy where somebody is investing money to make commodities, to get raw materials, and then make more money, we have then what is called capitalism, which is an expansionary economic system. So I want you to hold the difference between these two economic systems in your mind when we start to look at what happens to the world once Europe gets going, right? And so here we have it. The European nations start to colonize the rest of the world. They start to, you know, get those raw materials, right? And then there's the contraction after World War II. And so this is what we're talking about, right? We are talking about the literal plunder and the, you know, digging up of the rest of the world for raw materials, the need to colonize, the need to create these divisions of race, of nationality, of all of that stuff, because it is about resources. First and foremost, it's about getting that return on investment and then getting that profit to reinvest again, to keep the system expanding, not just going, expanding, right? And this is why we have literally gone to the ends of the earth, literally to the end of the life of the earth, to keep that system going, because it must always expand, but we have finite resources. And I want to say, even, you know, even in the North itself, the global North itself is also a settler colonialist project through the genocide, broken treaties, and and the political takeover of the North American continent as well, to plunder its own natural resources and then turn itself into a superpower for the rest of the world. So I think that's all we got here. So so that's just a set of maps to kind of start off this discussion, to talk about sort of these social oppressions that we're talking about in its specific historical and geographic context, in a capitalist economy, and one that was built through colonialism as well. So that's I hope that set it up for you, David.
It's brilliantly, as I knew you
Right.
would. And you really set up Kali Akuno, who I'm going to bring into the conversation. Kali Akuno is the co-founder of Cooperation Jackson, the former executive director of the U.S. Human Rights Network. He was, I believe, the founder of, and certainly the executive director of the Hurricane Katrina People's Relief Effort. And he is the co-editor. He's written a lot, but I just got this book honestly changed my organizing trajectory. It's called Jackson Rising: The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. Y'all got to read this book. Kali Akuno, welcome to the conversation. And comrade, in the immortal COVID words, you're on mute. Are you still on mute? I have to unmute you. Hold on. Oh, he's no longer a co-host. That's why.
You've got the power now.
Now you can unmute yourself. I apologize.
Okay. All right. So one correction, I was not the founder of the People's Hurricane Relief Fund. And I gotta put that out because there was so much drama around the struggle and the work in New Orleans. It began a downward trend on my health in many respects. But you know, one of the principal founders of that organization was Curtis Muhammad, who, you know, I had a lot of struggle with, but just want to honor and uplift his name as he recently passed. And, you know, despite our differences, made some valuable contributions to the people's struggle. And then there were other characters like Malcolm Suber, who's still with us, still working, still struggling in New Orleans with the workers group, Take 'em Down NOLA, which Malcolm was one of the central figures behind, him and Leon Waters, who if you're ever in New Orleans, go get a tour from Leon of in particular the rebellion, the slave rebellion of 1811, which by all accounts was actually the largest that took place in what are now called these United States of America. And you look for their book called Onward to New Orleans, which is a movement classic, which I think is being reprinted here recently. So just to drop those gems on folks. And to make that correction now, picking up on this, Mel, you actually took me in a different direction, but that's good, because I think it's critical to kind of add on some things. And this is be precursory, wouldn't be without maps. But this kind of conjunction about race and like white supremacy and capitalism, right? We have to remember that there is an origin story to this, right? Like these are not things that have always been with us. Implication being they are not things that will always be with us or don't have to always be with us. So this notion of race, of which white supremacy is kind of built upon, it's let's say its main source of origin is in the Spanish Reconquista, what they call it, using their frame of reference, right? The Spanish Reconquista, that is the Christian monarchical ruling classes reconquering, as they would put it, again, using their language, the Iberian Peninsula from the Moorish Islamic rulers who occupied critical portions of that peninsula for 800 years. And it was in that particular period of time that this conversion of the Arabic word ras, which means head, but also translates into like your line, as in your lineage, in this case, very much intertwined with patriarchy, meaning like who is your father or your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your lineage in that particular sense, what can be traced. That word gets converted into race as we understand it, over a period of time through this process, and is converted into something that winds up being essentialized, meaning a character that is kind of innate to one's being, or something that's genetic to one's being. But it started with the political purpose, right? In the process of this reconquest, oftentimes, particularly as the Moors were losing ground, many wouldn't put up sometimes much of a fight. Now, there was 800 years of fight, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But oftentimes folks would say, hey, look, rather than fighting you, let's strike a deal, right? And these are two-class societies, right? The Moors had a class society, the Spanish Christians, the people who became Spanish, to be clear, because they weren't Spanish at that time. They were either from Castile or Aragon or one of the other kingdoms. That's something that came and evolved later. But for short term now, the Spanish who came into that, they would strike these deals. The ruling classes amongst them would strike these deals. Like, I'll join your side if I'm allowed to keep my lands, right? But the price of keeping one's lands wind up becoming, okay, well, you have to convert from being a Muslim in order to be Christian. Well, over a period of time, so there was a time when that was acceptable within this whole process. But then it came a time where there were class tensions, particularly amongst the Christian side, where the foot soldiers in particular, and some of the merchants start saying, well, why are these folks who we basically have defeated, why are they being allowed to retain their possessions, their titles, their lands, their holdings, their feudal subjects, their slaves? Why are they being allowed to do that, right? When they have no inherent right to do that, because they are actually not good Christians. This is the critical piece, right? Like, these are Muslims hiding. And so what became was like, your conversion wasn't good enough, because what the political argument wound up being similar to what we know now, it's changing. Like, look at what Le Pen is doing, for instance, if you want to understand the logic, look at what Le Pen is doing now in France, or what's even going on here in the United States, where they're talking about legacy Americans, right? Or the legacy French, i.e. another term for like native or white people, the white folks. So how this logic winds up being reproduced for political purposes time and time again. So in this case, how it evolved was people wanted to make a distinction that those folks who converted, right, that they could be dispossessed of their lands because their lineage was a Muslim one, right? Their lineage was a Moorish one, and it didn't matter whether they were Christian or not, because remember, part of, or if you didn't know, there was some, at different points in times, there were very there were clear restrictions on whether Christians could be enslaved or not, or whether they could be dispossessed or not. Muslims could easily be dispossessed, right? Jews could easily be dispossessed, right? Folks who weren't part of any Abrahamic religion could also easily be dispossessed. But there was a logic and a framework. So how do you subvert that? You got to create a political logic which says, doesn't matter what they converted, these folks, their grandfather was Arab, so they will always be Arab, or they will always be Black, or they will always be African, because there was some combination of all that going on there. These folks will always be what their grandfathers were, regardless of what their phenotype, right, what they look like outward. This is who they were. It was created for a political purpose, to dispossess them of their possessions. Like, we need to be clear. And that winds up being transferred once the Queen Isabella hooked up From being broke, from fighting a bunch of wars, again, bringing back the profit motive and that incentive, saying, I need to unite with Ferdinand to round up some kingdom. I just sent a little cat from Italy who happened to also, have a Jewish background. I just sent him on this little errand that I don't know if it's going to be profitable or not, right? We just finished the last major outpost that they conquered was in 1492. So I'm picking up on that, was in 1492 when Granada, the last Moorish holdout, was finally defeated, right? So the same time in the same period that this reconquest becomes complete is the same time that Cristobal Colon, known as Christopher Columbus in English, winds up getting lost and finding the Virgin Islands and thinking somehow he had made it over to Asia, right? And the reason being, going back, the central wealth of kind of the world economy and the world knowledge of the economy, the fundamental pivot of that at that point in time was Asia, right? And so what were they trying to do at that particular point in time? The Silk Route, which is the dominant route. Y'all remember all the jokes about Marco Polo. That was the actual real thing long before Marco Polo showed up. It'd been going on for millennia, way before that. The trade between Africa, Western Asia, and Europe with East Asia and India and all the areas in between had been going on for quite a long time. They were trying to circumvent that because at that time, the dominant power that controlled kind of the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, which is the main route to get at, were the Ottomans, right? Another Muslim force, who at that time, the Europeans had no potential notion of defeating militarily, right? In any form or fashion. So they were trying to go around them, right? And find some other route to access these riches. That is the political logic by which this winds up being extended in the colonization project. First kind of starts by happenstance, but then it exceeds as they pick up on things that they had learned, in particular, during the so-called Crusades, right? Where they learned, in particular, some of the earlier things. So we think of the commodity in particular, some of these original cash crops, which drew and kind of uplifted the transformation of the Americas, with sugar, right? With tobacco, with cotton, with indigo, with rice. Because that was something that was kind of just learned in the New World, when in fact, a lot of that was actually perfected some centuries earlier in Cyprus and in Crete, where they set up some of the original slave plantations and then perfected and learned these tools and then brought them to, over to quote unquote the Americas, first in the Caribbean, right? And then extended that primarily in all the areas where this could grow, which was primarily in the southern United States, the western seaboard of Central America, and the northern portions of South America, what is now called South America. But they also had to extend the political logic, right? Within the framework that they had. So the initial piece of folks that they encountered who were not Christian, they were open and subject to being slaves. And we saw that the very vicious nature of that with Christopher Columbus, very much like once he actually winds up getting into Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and Dominican Republic. The brutal program of enslavement, so much so that, one of the earliest missionaries said that, hey, we need to stop that. But in the persons of stop that, he said, well, we can bring the practices from the old world to the new, and thus the trade primarily in African bodies winds up becoming a central focus of the trade there. But how do you extend that, right? How do you justify that? Well, you had to justify that not on the basis of religion. You had to then justify that on the basis of things that you wind up, you can identify, skin color being one of those essential demarcation points. And the earlier piece as to why, because there were already a fair number of African people, particularly from Northern Africa and Europe, who were Christians, who were being enslaved, but because they were Christians, you had to come up with some other reason as to why they were enslaved. So this is a short version of a kind of a history story, but the important piece is that the transformative elements of this were colonization and the new method of production for commodities. That is the critical transition point as to how this political kind of narrative around the exercise of power and how you justify seizing and dispossessing people of wealth becomes systemic and then attached to a whole program of wealth and capital accumulation and wealth generation. Like that is how this whole notion of white supremacy winds up being born. It is not something that is inherent even to European in its logic per se. It is something that was born very specifically with capitalism, right? Now, I will say this and then stop. I've been arguing that the 20th century in many respects was a cleavage between these two and continues to be a cleavage between these two. What I'm talking about specifically is what we call white supremacy and capitalism. Because at the end of the day, capitalism really doesn't need white supremacy. It's helpful, but sometimes it can be hurtful too, right? And now that the central pivot of capitalism, at least its productive aspects, have once again shifted to Asia, right? We see white supremacy being exercised as a principal political tool once again on the world stage as those who once were in a dominant position within the system, those in Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand in particular, as they become less important within the productive dimensions of this overall system, they're clinging to the political edifice that they still control, where they still have some dominance. That's the culture and the politics of white supremacy, which ensnares the entire world system that they created of these nation states. That's a new construction that also goes with this. And all these extra state institutions like the UN or NATO. When you hear the United States talking about the global community, they only talking about a few themselves, white folks, and a few other people that run with their program. That's fundamentally what they mean. And right now, they still maintain a military dominance, but their economic dominance of the planet is gone. So that's why these two things are splitting, and that split is going to be deadly, as we are seeing play out in the Ukraine as just one particular dimension of how this is struggling, even though that's covering up far worse atrocities that are happening in Yemen, that are happening and ongoing in Syria, Ethiopia, the Sudan. We can go on and on and on. But this is how these two things intersect, depart, and I think how we need to analyze them in the concrete so that we can be very clear about how we organize going forward to build a better world.
Damn. Thank you, Kali. Thank you, Matt. See, this is what I do, y'all. I surround myself with people who are smarter than I am, and then I listen and let them teach me as we go. So thank you very much, Mel and Kali. I am really excited now to bring in to the conversation Nicola Walters. Nicola is somebody who I've really gotten to know over the last couple of years. She's an organizer, she's a researcher, she's an educator, she teaches at Cal Poly Humboldt. And the thing that I really want to lift up is that she publicly identifies, and on her bio, I have seen in many places, she literally will describe that she, quote, "I sculpt my career using Joel Olson's guiding question, quote, what is the most damage I can do given my biography, abilities, and commitments to the racial order and rule of capital." Nicola, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, David. And honestly, hearing those words really is so impactful for me because Joel Olson has since passed. He was one of my teachers at Northern Arizona University and really was the person who introduced me to thinking about how race and capitalism were so foundational to this world, to our country in specific. But that was really the wool being taken off of my eyes as a young 18-year-old in Northern Arizona. But before I jump into all that stuff, I guess I have a lot to say that connects to what a lot of other folks have been sharing too. I mean, I just wanted to acknowledge that I work on the ancestral lands of the Wiyot peoples, which includes the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, and Blue Lake Rancheria. But where I live is up in the Eugene area. It's on the ancestral territory of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, which includes Chela, Winfeli, and Kalapuya. I grew up in northern New Mexico on Pueblo land near Zuni, Tigwa, Ute, and Dene territory. My mom grew up in Zimbabwe, thinking about the colonization wave that happens throughout Africa as well. So these spaces really contribute to a lot of my thinking around this subject. And I just am so grateful to hear your all's perspectives, bringing in the histories that I think a lot of us just don't really have access to. And it was an opportunity for me to get a snapshot of that in higher education, but it's just incredible to see, how we're picking up these stories to help to understand the real truths that have shaped the way that we engage our communities, the way we participate in academia, all the things that we're doing, and primarily for me, organizing within. I'm a labor organizer with the California Faculty Association. I'm the membership and organizing chair. And I'm also a founding member of Higher Ed Labor United, which is now a national group of workers across job categories, coast to coast, across sectors, trying to organize for better working and learning conditions in higher education, specifically trying to give voice, some legs to the labor movement. And there are a couple of things that I wanted to speak to, which I think helps to sort of situate some of this conversation here. But, when I think about labor and organizers and how we're trying to, answer the question that's being brought forward as a prompt for this panel, like, why do we need to understand how these systems are developed, and like, what can our movements for liberation really learn in understanding these relationships? I mean, this is really the kind of focal point of the sort of new work that we're trying to do within CFA. I mean, this has been a kind of like legacy of work that's been building, but ultimately trying to understand why, we need to unpack some of these histories and perspectives to be able to work with people within our own communities, to really understand like what's brought us to be here and why all these pieces are not inextricable, or why they are inextricable from one another. So one thing I wanted to share with y'all, and I'll post this into the chat because this is a practice that we have been incorporating in our union. So all of our meetings now start with our land acknowledgement, and y'all heard me offer a land acknowledgement at the beginning of the summit, really trying to identify the lands that we stand on, and also the relationships as settlers to California natives, specifically since we're talking about the California Faculty Association, we bring it really close to California. But what I've put in the chat here is our interruption practice statement. And what we say at the beginning of every meeting that we do with our union is, as part of our continuing commitment to racial justice work, when we experience examples of racial narratives, racism, or whiteness in our meetings, or as we conduct our business, we will speak up. This means we can interrupt the meeting and draw the issue to one another's attention. We will do this kindly, with care, in good faith. And as we engage interruptions, we will take an intersectional approach, reflecting the fact that white supremacy and racism operate in tandem with interlocking systems of oppression of colonialism, class, cis heteropatriarchy, and ableism. This statement is a reminder that we commit to do this in the service of ending the system of racial oppression. And after we read the statement, a lot of times we offer reflections on this to really try to understand where we're seeing examples of this, or sometimes even practicing interrupting practices in our own spaces. Because as the statement makes very clear, these components of class, of cis heteropatriarchy, of ableism, of colonialism are connected all together. And as Kali was so, powerfully sharing with us as well, that, white supremacy and colonialism and capitalism, like all these pieces have that relationship with one another. And it's really helpful for us to then understand how, we are benefiting from a lot of times legacies of colonialism, of racial oppression, of these different elements that, we see then in our organizing spaces. And that kind of brings me to thinking about, how we try to commit to this work and how we try to learn from one another so that we can try to make the changes that we know are so desperately needed in our communities. Because straight up, like, race hasn't been a stagnant, right? As Kali was saying also, race has been something that has been morphed and manipulated as a political tool and using this to oppressive ends. Joel Olson's words that do guide the way that I think about work and trying to engage in sometimes the challenge of being in relation with one another, trying to like get, understand these different dynamics that are all at work and trying to like be in the learning process, all along the way is it's tough. And in labor work, in labor organizing, it's incredibly challenging as well because, we are intersectional, we have a very diverse group of people. Even in the California Faculty Association, we represent 29,000 faculty members across California. I mean, it's just incredible to think about the communities that we're organizing in and how we engage with these really important topics to try to understand like the histories, the current conditions, and hopefully what we're trying to get to in the future as well. So I just wanted to say a couple of things about drop a couple of things to look at that could contribute to some of the thinking around this topic. Joel Olson really referenced a lot of the times in my experiences with him, one particular author who's Noel Ignatieff, and his book is How the Irish Became White. And he helps to kind of understand a lot of that kind of like racial dynamics that were happening in the United States around like looking at like why was it that we had certain things, like it wasn't good enough to just be Christian. Like we see the transition when we look at the ways that our Constitution and the documents were being developed in the early United States, like the distinction shifts from being Christian, non-Christian to racial lines. And we also see the fact that there become these different like wages of whiteness that start getting paid to white folks that are Irish who, as people are seeing the sort of like early formations of like different class relationships in the United States, they were looking at the Irish and they're looking at, newly freed slaves that are in the North living in community with one another and like looking at the power, like that's becomes a threat to like the notion of capitalism and the notions of control. And so this very conscious shift starts happening of like looking at not just the Irish, but looking at Italians and looking at immigrants coming from Europe and this sort of whiteness bubble that it becomes the sort of like in group. And we see people kind of negotiating with to maintain this kind of power. So it's kind of like, whiteness is political. It's not like we're like you're a white person. We're like looking at folks in terms of, or rather like we're looking at like not just like people's like the phenotypes, if you will, but like also looking at like systems of power. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that, when we're looking at power, we have to be able to like understand like what this power is ultimately trying to utilize and the tools of it. And so understanding capitalism and the power over the legacies of this development, I think is really integral to that type of conversation. So we can't just stop at just certain spaces. We have to be really like looking at the relationships of power that are guiding this whole thing. So I'll just offer that for right now.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I'm going to actually now at this point bring both Kali and Mel into the conversation together with y'all and invite any reflections as that you've heard from each other that you want to either ask about or lift up.
Sure, I can go. Both of you had such wonderful expositions, brought so much of this multi-dimensional problem into focus. I think the one thing I want to add a little bit is like this question of labor and the nature of capitalism as being again this investment thing. You're literally like buying raw materials or stealing them. You've got labor either stolen in the form of slavery or bonded in the form of wage, and for to produce a commodity for the market. And it's really interesting. Like I learned this very interesting tidbit that Christopher Columbus's uncle actually had one of the first sugar like slave plantations in the Canary Islands, I think. And Columbus had actually worked there. He did a worked there for the summer at his uncle's plantation, and learned about the particular production organization of a sugar plantation. And sugar, in the commodity production of sugar, is one of the first industries to be organized around what we would recognize as an industrial type of like a factory setting, right? You had assembly, you had lines, you had discrete divisions of labor, and then you had a commodity for market. So that's what Columbus actually had in his head as he was going across the Atlantic. And that's why he wrote back, he's like, oh, we could do the same thing over here. And so and so the importance of labor and the need to have a basically coerced labor force to provide the engine of capitalism, to continue that profit margin and that reinvestment, was really key also to the formation of race. Now, as people point out, there was forms of slavery before what we understand today as slavery, and of course there was, but I like pointing to, like, sort of different like movies or whatever. It's like you have, like, the funny thing happened to the way the Forum was an example of how old world slavery worked, where you were still considered a human being, you were considered bonded, and there was a possibility of what was called manumission, that you could either buy your freedom or you did some kind of like really great service and they freed you. Now this is different from what later became chattel slavery, where the humanity of your labor force is being questioned, right? The humanity of that had to be manufactured as well. I also point to the play Othello, right, to show that in Shakespeare's time, right, the Moorish empires were understood as a power. They were understood. Africans were understood as people, right? Othello was a Moorish lord that was, a part of the elite, right? And there were, of course, parts of this sort of racial otherness starting to slip in the language of that play. But just like, how did we get from Othello to then this idea that Africans are somehow subhuman? So to understand that in sequence is also a way to understand the construction of race as a form of labor control and a coercion of labor that made capitalism possible. And yeah, and so that's an these are interesting things to kind of hold in our minds when we're trying to, like, again, like pull back this curtain. And it's really, really important, especially now as we face what is termed in many ways as sometimes tension, but some of other of us call fascism. The fascists, a fascist sensibility that is creeping and sometimes exploding in our society. Frantz Fanon said that when colonialism happened, it basically split the world into two. It split the world into that in-group that Nicola was talking about, who is considered to be part of the core or the polity, and who is consigned to a zone of non-being. And so the more that we even understand anybody in this planet to be in a zone of non-being, whether it's Black and brown people, indigenous people, homeless people, right, the poor, like I say, any society that throws people away or replicates this value judgment and who is human and who is deserving and who is not, we will always be prone to fascism. And this is exactly where we're at right now. Fascism is coming up, as Kali said, at this time when these things are fracturing because capitalism itself is in crisis, right? So as we're looking through this, I'd love to, because I don't know the answer, but there's so many ways that we can get at this to try to untie this Gordian knot and construct a society where we can again be as people, as among equals, and that we can get to this place where we can work together to form a different kind of society. So sorry, went on a little longer than I thought, but yeah.
You're great, Mel. Thank you for all of your words. I wasn't intending to jump in there, but I just was like giving you some props for it. Go ahead if you were interested, Kali.
You know what didn't get mentioned, I think, is how patriarchy is also a foundation for both of these systems. Like I didn't touch on that as much, like a few little key points. But we have to make sure that we understand how this plays a role in the development of both of those systems, right? When we're talking about the lineage question, right, and that being very specifically along males' lines, like that's building on an older foundation of hierarchy and domination, of which patriarchy is. Like it's the oldest of the three that we're talking about now. Not universally, let's make that clear, right? Because feudalism, or what Samir Amin calls the tributary, mode of production, which I actually prefer, because feudalism is something that fits within the tributary mode, but that was very particular to Europe, some particular dynamics. This form of domination precedes that in class-based societies. Like those two kind of go together with, property being assigned along gender lines and along other lines of domestication. I would also argue for like pets and also plants, and how we started to create within these societies logics which separated us from the natural world, right, and not see ourselves as part of the natural world. Right. And so you wind up getting like these historical religious narratives, which, what's the famous line? And God gave man dominion, right? Very specifically within that framework, both in terms of ownership, possession, and who is the owner and who is the possessor, right? And then what they can do with it and how can they dispense of their, property or possessions. Now, it still wasn't commodified at that point. That's a critical thing, but owned nonetheless. And I think the critical piece is how there's a good book. I can't remember who the editors are, which I would argue. I've been throwing some stuff in there because I think it's important. What is it? 500 years or 5,000? And it's talking about like the world systems that came out maybe about 20, 25 years ago. And I think it's good. There's a lot of things in there I would, dispute and argue, but almost all the essays lay a good foundation of saying, capitalism rests upon some earlier foundations. And we need to understand those earlier foundations if we're going to truly undo all of the bullshit systems that are a part of it, so that we don't, in the search and in the quest and in the struggle, to create a better world, we can be very one-dimensional if we just say, which I think has happened in a lot of the 20th century experience, like our central tasks are to, one, control the state, right? And then just socialize the means of production. A bunch of other questions got left out, reproductive labor, right? Ecological questions. A lot of those things got totally left out of that equation. And the socialist project suffered for it. Let's just be honest and be real. We don't need to hide from that. We need to learn from it, right? It suffered from it greatly, right? Then the democratization of, the relations of production also suffered from that, because, just what exactly does socialization of the means of production mean, right? And too often that has been described as like a bureaucratic state or some top-down entity just doing all the centralized planning, or doing centralized planning, which then negates the other kind of social dynamics you need about who needs what, when, where, and why. That was a real problem, right? That these projects wind up in encountering, and we don't need to shy away from that. We need to deal with it because there are actual solutions to it, right? It's not like there aren't solutions to it. There are solutions to it. We just need to learn that and replicate that. But I wanted to just interject like that piece also plays a critical foundation and how race gets constructed and then how capitalism gets constructed, and they work all together. It's not like we're going to eliminate one per se and then the other two will fall like dominoes. That was the other piece I was saying. Like this thing could be they could be splitting. Like capitalism benefits greatly and will continue to benefit greatly in certain places, from white supremacy, but it's not dependent upon that everywhere, right? And this system, as we've learned, the last 200 years of struggle against it, is very good at adapting. It's very good at learning, right? And shifting and shaping dynamics. So, I'm one of those people, I think it is at the end of its rope, but, it's not going, I'm not one who believes it's going to collapse on its own. And if it does, I think we're going to be in serious problem, because if it totally collapses on its own, that means that basically it's going to kill off the Earth's reproductive capacity itself, which won't leave anything for us to then inherit, pass on, or transform. So we better stop the shit before it gets to that point, right? So the ecological limits to me are what are the real, limits to what I think this system is able to produce. But look, let's not act like they aren't aware of that. The capitalists aren't aware of that, and they aren't thinking about it. This space race madness that we heard, the new space race madness that we had last summer with 3 billionaires, multi-billionaires, they didn't really go into outer space, but doesn't matter. All of them have these grand ambitions about colonizing the solar system, and they're not playing. Like this not a joke. They're not playing. Jeff Bezos, his logic is, I want to put all the polluting industries on the moon or on Mars, right? And then we can, if we shift all the slaves there or the robots there that might be doing the production, depending on how that wrote, then we could, make the Earth clean and pristine again. But his has a eugenics program, and if you listen to him very carefully, he's very clear about reducing the number of people on the planet. Don't think he's not. Pay very close attention to what he's saying. And then his boy, Elon Musk, is even more explicit and clear about a eugenics program and about, why he wants to colonize the moon. And he's also the Mars and the moon. So he's always come out up front and said, I think the humanity is not going to survive on Earth. And that we need to go to the moon so that a few of us can survive. Because we ain't going with them. Y'all, ain't nobody listening or an earshot is going to be, or who's going to be on this video, going to be on any one of them spaceships that either one of them is building. Be very clear. So when you think you're cheering for these fools, you cheering against, like you're working against your own interests. You're cheering against yourself, right? And I think we need to be very clear about where this is going and why it's going this way, and how they're taking it seriously. We need to take it seriously and build a program that can address it.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Cully. There were a couple of things that you were saying that I was just like, yes, there's a lot of aspects that I could respond to right there, but I just like love the thing. It's like, well, Jeff Bezos is like off, like trying to make it up into space. Like Chris Smalls is organizing Amazon workers here. It's like, y'all go over there and do that. We're going to be like organizing the movement to make the change, and I really appreciate that you're acknowledging that, we have to be really thinking about, where our alliances are, right? Like who are the people that we're talking to? And that a lot of times can get really tricky if people are not having these broader conversations about intersectionality, is because they really just get focused, right, on like, oh, these are these are my people. And you're like, oh, hang on a second. No. And if you're looking at it, especially in labor, a lot of times you kind of hear this little thing about, oh, we're all about the bread and butter issues, or all I want are the bread and butter issues talked about. And they're talking about capital, but they're not seeing how gender and race and ableism and all these different other indigeneity, age, marital status, all these different things, caste, which is now through CFA being incorporated into a protected category through our organizing work. But these are the kinds of things that a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about if they're just like, I'm about the bread and butter, I'm just trying to think about capital, but they're not seeing all of these intersections that relate to their experience. And I loved Just in February, Higher Ed Labor United convened a winter summit where we had people coming from around the country talking and sharing with us. And the conversation shifted from this notion of, we're not people that are talking about those bread and butter issues, like, we want the whole damn buffet. And it's not just enough to get us, the measly, like the bones thrown off the table from, to like help us with our wages. We really need to be thinking about all the different ways that we as workers, we as community members, us as folks, a part of this fabric of nature around the globe, right, are connected to these spaces and need to be considered and taken care of as whole people in relation with one another. So thanks, Kali, for doing the coverage that you're doing, because it's just getting me fired up over here, thinking about all the different aspects that have to be addressed and how we can't just say, oh no, we'll deal with that one in a minute. It's like, no, we've been waiting and it doesn't change because these are connected, and we have to, it's more complicated, but we have to bring it all up here if we're going to be able to make the changes that are transformative that we really are wanting to see in our communities. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I think both of you brought up, reproduction and reproductive labor. And I think that's so important when we think about, like, when we think about how we are going to survive, because we're really in this existential crisis right now. And when we think about how we survive, we have to think of like everything from stem to stern. I always laugh when Elon Musk is like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna go to Mars and all stuff like that." You're gonna take a bunch of rich people with you, ain't never cleaned a toilet in your life. Who the hell is going to take care of? Who's gonna wipe your ass in space? Okay, that's gonna be one filthy rocket. I'm gonna tell you that, right? Because it's like, when people have these like kind of grand visions of like all of that, they're not really thinking of like what is really supporting this lifestyle. And then when people saying that I'm just trying to live my life day to day to get my bread and butter, they're also thinking of it in terms of like, I need money to get that, right? Instead of, I need food, and food requires a healthy ecosystem, and food requires a community that can help you get that food and process it and all of that stuff. So, thank you, Justin, for that the summary. And part of that really is thinking about how capitalism is going to collapse, because I think it might come sooner rather than later. Honestly, looking at the collapse of the dollar now as the reserve currency, looking at food prices, gas prices, all of these in the supply chain stuff, like all of these systems are breaking down. And, we are not the only ones that are going to kick it over as well. Mother Nature is going to do that. My colleague Ali, who painted these beautiful paintings of like the food baskets and stuff, talks about a great flood that's going to that we know that USGS and FEMA know are going to hit the Central Valley of California. $175 billion agricultural economy with third largest agricultural economy in the world. If that flood hits, that has implications for the global food system. The fact that for the last 3 years running, the winter wheat crop in the Midwest has been wiped out by floods and frost, that is hitting us now. And so we have to, in order to think about how we survive this and how we can come together to build something that is outside this extractive, octopus-like sucker economy, we have to think from stem to stern. We got to think about, yes, we'll all wipe our own asses. We know how to do that. We're working class people. But when we think about food, shelter, care, right? Building communities of care as opposed to communities of exploitation. What is that going to look like? And I'll just leave with this. A lot of preppers love to get a lot of canned food and Walmart freeze-dried stuff and put it in their garage and say, "Oh, I'm gonna ride out the apocalypse." I'm like, okay, sure, you're gonna die of cancer from all of that weird processed food. But I think back to my father. My father was in the Philippines in World War II as a child, and they had to escape their village from the Japanese occupation. They lived in the forest for 2 years. And he has so many stories from that. I feel like I have got a lot of my sensibility. I didn't even realize at the time from listening to his stories. And he talked about one of the things that really helped them keep going was there were people who lived in forests. There were people, you know, the old women in the forest who planted the hillsides with potatoes and um, and all kinds of food products, so that because they knew that refugees were coming through. There's going to be a lot of climate refugees coming, you know, there are already, right? I live in a city full of climate refugees that are being brutalized right now by our city council. But so you have two different models of how to survive, right? You have the model of the prepper, the atomized neoliberal Elon Musk type that's like, I am going to save me, you know, and hoarding stuff. And then you have the community model, the story of my father's community, where people came together to go back to those original relationships, go back to the relationship with the land, and to be able to survive on a community scale, to just literally like transform the conditions of existence so that we all can live. And that potato, the one that he said was planted all over the hillsides, he called it maca libre, which means in our language to make free. So, you know, I look to liberation struggles. I look to liberation that goes all the way down to that basic. And, I'm proud to be part of an effort that's trying to do that with seed banking and ecosystem restoration. I know Kali is engaged in it too. And I'd love to hear what you, you have going on too, Nicola. And, you know, part of this is looking at the reproduction of a community that can help us reproduce as well, to keep humanity going, you know. I mean, Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. Bye. Good luck, you know. But this earth is all that we got, and each other is all that we got. And as Fanon said, one of the things that can help a liberation movement translate to a universal humanism is that we all are in a project that's consciously working with each other to help ourselves survive. So
Yeah, Kali, I don't know if you want to jump in there. I had one thing that I wanted to say. You know, a lot of what you're saying, Mel, just is really resonating with me. And I'm kind of thinking about like, I was like, what am I doing right now? You know, and I was like, my work, of course, you know, I was talking a lot about the organizing side. And so I really do try to think about trying to like focus on education. And as a teacher, like that's where I'm at too. And I know that y'all and doing the work that you're doing are intertwined with education as well. But I really feel like we have to be able to have these kinds of conversations, you know, to imagine different ways of approaching things and imagining what it's going to look like for us to like live in community with each other again, and like think about like solidarity, and to try to transform from this very individualized kind of focus that's really like you can only you know those that people are so much more comfortable to interact with than the other side. And it was funny because a lot of my students were here helping with this conference over the last 3 days, and it was awesome to see them making some connections throughout you know, the 3 days as well. We had a exercise on on Tuesday where I give them 3 scenarios. The first one is they have 10 minutes in a group to plan for a zombie apocalypse. And then after 10 minutes of thinking about that, they have 10 minutes to plan for the end of capitalism. And then after that, they have 10 minutes to plan for a new economy. They get to choose based off our reading. We look at Gus Speth, who worked with the United Nations and talked a lot about like the joyful economy is the article that we're referencing, and looking at his work and trying to connect that to class. But I do that little process with my students because they're coming from this like, you know, notion about eugenics and harden and overpopulation and all this kind of conditioning thinking, right? You know, and just like control and like individualism and all this stuff. And it's like when they engage in these exercises, like they can think about zombies because we have films about that. So it's like, wait, what are these zombies like? Can they go across water? Like, what's the story? And I'm like, choose your zombies and go, you know? But they have references for that. But then if they start thinking about the end of capitalism, things start getting a little bit trickier. And then when they start thinking about like this new economy, even though they've started, you know, they're pulling resources from readings, like it's still so futuristic and imaginative for them. And I really feel like engaging in these types of conversations with y'all, like bringing in that history, like thinking about our maps and the way that we approach the world, and like then thinking about our societies and how we like unify, connect, and build together. Like this is, in my mind, like the type of preparation I'm trying so hard to like insert into academic spaces so that maybe people will think about things or be open to thinking about things a little bit differently.
David, looked like you were going to raise a question or a point a little while ago. Did we lose David?
I'm on mute because my dog is going nuts because another dog is walking by. Y'all keep going.
Oh.
Hello, Governor Peanut Butter.
I will actually remind folks, if you want to join this conversation, I've been watching. I haven't seen anybody's hand raised yet, but if you want to make a comment or ask a question, make use of that raised hand, and we'll bring you into it. I will, Mel. You once said to me something I thought was very powerful. You said race is something that happens to you. I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, because that really, like, you know, it's like it's not that I'm genetically defective because of my pigment, right? Like there is a context, and I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, and you know, I sort of came up with that based on sort of my own identity and positioning. So I'm Filipino. I'm from the Philippines. Not many people outside of the places where a lot of Filipinos are kind of know what that is. So, you know, I get coded and seen differently, as different, you know. Sometimes I'll say I'm Asian in the winter and Latina in the summer, because the darker my skin gets, the more differently I get treated. Interesting thing about that, you know. Up here and in other places I get coded as native. So, you know, I have this weird sort of positioning in that, you know, like I get the experience of how people treat me if they think that I'm Asian, as opposed to, you know, the races that they are used to. And so I think that gave me a perspective in that, you know, again, race being constructed. I mean, like, you know, it as opposed to what we can term ethnicity, or even like the idea of indigeneity of being tied to a place. You know, we are all indigenous to somewhere. And what does that mean necessarily? It means that you come from a people who co-evolved with a place at some point in time over the 200,000 years that Homo sapiens has been on this planet. And part of what capitalism and race and patriarchy and all of these systems of dividing have done is divide us from that relationship to the thing that sustains us, right? Again, going all the way back to the basics, right? And like when I think about it, I'm like, the construction of whiteness was actually a violence that was done on people from all different parts of Europe, you know, generally the poor and the desperate of those nations, that ripped away their connection to a place, whether it's Sweden or France or Bavaria or whatever, you know, wherever place you were from. And isn't that so convenient to construct a colonizing force with people who are disconnected from their land? Because if you understand yourself as being connected to a place, and you see somebody else, no matter what they look like, and understand that they're connected to a place, kind of the way that the Silk Road and the 1491 was, and say, well, you know, obviously, you know, it's harder to think of them as nothing. It's harder to kill them. It's harder to take that land if you have that understanding about yourself. And so, you know, like, isn't that convenient, right? To then reclassify us in something that has nothing to do with the land that has sustained us, you know? And so I think that, yeah, I mean, in wherever we are now, because we've been dispersed, I am part of a diaspora, you know, we can if we can find a way to bridge those connections, and we're going to have to, because we're going to have to figure out how to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, and shelter ourselves, I think those are necessities that might bring into being a different way. So
Mel, there's a great comment in the chat. I'm going to ask all three of you to address. I also want to take this opportunity to really take head on this intersection for somebody who does occupy the body that I have, because as a cisgendered white male, I have so many privileges that society gives me. But make no mistake about it, the ruling elites let somebody like me have those privileges in order to prevent me from uniting and for us to unite, because we could literally run this fucking world if we actually united. We could dismantle all of these oppressions and we could actually have a jumping joyous planet. And I really want to underscore something that I'm struggling to help other people see what I see, which is, yes, we've gotten privileges, and to deny it is to deny reality. But it comes at a hell of a fucking cost. It actually comes at the cost of the humanity that Mel just described. I mean, it literally, in order to be white, I have to actually not even understand or know my Scottish or Irish actual heritage. The ethnicity and the culture that actually came with that. I mean, like, so what is left? The fucking Super Bowl and drinking beer? I mean, is that what white culture, like, I don't even know what white culture really is, except for just this sort of grotesque kind of thing. So I just think that those of us with my pigment have really got to find ways to help people understand that this privilege that we absolutely have is a bad fucking deal. It's a bad deal.
From a humane perspective, yes, David. If that's not your perspective, then it offers a lot of benefits.
Exactly. Right? No, that's the point, right? And that's why Fanon, to me, speaks so deeply, right? Because yes, there are those privileges absolutely exist, right? But the deeper humanity, like what life is supposed to be about, it actually is a bad deal for me, and I'm trying to convince others of that. I do want to. I think that each of you has seen the question and the comment. It seemed like a good one. I'd invite folks to react to that.
Is this the one about neoliberalism you're talking about?
Yes.
Let me make sure I'm looking at it right again. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to reread. I had it right in front of me. No worries.
I guess I'd like to start on this one historically. I think definitely without question, since 1973, with the neo-fascist coup that took out Allende, that put Pinochet in power, this particular set of programmatic ideas around how to manage society and govern the economy have become the dominant framework, within the world system, right? Of basically how we're going to manage labor, and we're going to extract from the earth, what they need to run. And large parts of it unevenly, different places in the planet, entailed, the cannibalization of the nation states, particularly some nation states, those in Latin America, Africa, Asia, the worst amongst them, but not, North America hasn't been immune from that totally. And surrendering that back over to private ownership, like a lot of the services, the goods, land ownership, surrendered back over to corporations. And it's definitely aggravated, the gap, like the wealth gap on every level, right? The rich got even more richer, the gap between them and the, you use the language, used in the United States, the gap between the middle class, which is a fiction, grew worse. But the piece what I'm saying about historically is one of the arguments I've really been trying to make and writing an actual series about this called Shifting Focus, is for us to really interrogate the systems of governance that capitalism uses, right? And to not get stuck politically and programmatically in trying to uphold one form of capitalist management over another. And that they've experimented with various different forms of governance the last 500 years, right? And at any given time, you could look at any decade, any century, and you'll see, they're doing some fascist experiment over here, very clear and explicitly. On the other side, they're doing some, bourgeois democratic experiment over here. In some place, they're doing some social democratic experiment over there. It's based upon the needs of capital and the dynamics of negotiation, with the forces of contention against it within that society, either how weak they are or how strong they are. And one of the things that I think, what's called neoliberalism, has its origins very early as a systemic practice in the development of capitalism, right? Some alterations, but basically, if you look at most of the earlier slave adventures, like that was wholesale just privateering, right? Now, granted, it was the cousins of lords, but they were given these like little charters, like whatever you go and find, you can have, and you can build up the East India Company, and it might be tied to X, Y, and Z. But this form isn't new. It was brought back because the social democratic version, which became the dominant form, in parts of the West, for a very short period of time, right, for about 30, 40 years, like that was putting too much of a strain on capital, right? A strain that they never fully agreed to, right? They only agreed to that to keep socialism basically at bay. Let's not forget that, right? Particularly after so that's called World War II. But they never agreed to that. Like they never really agreed to share with the working class. They had to do it temporarily. And the second, they can come up with programs that start undermining that, getting people to work in their own interests, they did, and been continuing to work on it and will continue to work on it. And I think we just need to be clear, because a lot of the politics that is, and I'm gonna get, I'm not presenting this as a sectarian, I'm presenting this to engage in ideological struggle. It is not our duty to be trying to construct social democracy again, right? The social democracy is just another variant of capitalism, right? It's got a better redistribution program, but it leaves the fundamental ownership of the means of production still in private hands. It still leaves the management of labor under the control of the bourgeoisie, right? And they just say, we'll just give you a better deal or a better bargain. The hell with that, right? Let's just skip all that. Let's have no illusions about that. It's, social democracy is not the antidote to neoliberalism, right? And this is one of the things, at least for me, I know why I'm waging this, because we've just come through a 20-year period. I think the social forum in particular, which I enjoyed, I participated in, but also tried to engage in struggle in it. It was a space largely dominated by social democrats who wanted to make the central focus a focus on neoliberalism. And I was one who was arguing like that is short of the goal of what we need to be aiming for, right? And I didn't, we just aligning with the more kinder, capitalist controllers, so that they don't treat me as bad, me and my folks as bad as if they were once treated, or they've treated in other areas. Like that's enough. That's not enough. We need to be ascribing for more. Now that doesn't mean we don't pay close attention to the dismantling the dominant form of what exists, but we also need to recognize how it's shifting, because neoliberalism has paved the way for the insurgent fascism, which is developing now and is rampant now. And this is why you see in many respects, again, I'm gonna bring up something because I do think it's important. I think what's going to happen today and tomorrow over in France has some global implications, right? And if you look at it, historically, there's no way in hell you would think that Le Pen has any chance of beating Macron. But why is she this close? Because fundamentally, Macron's economic and social program ain't that much different than hers, right? And the base is like, well, why would I? Parts of the base are saying, why not go with the real deal as opposed to this fake horse and pony show, right? If we're gonna go fast as hell, let's go with it. If we're gonna shut the borders and we're gonna start prosecuting, Arabs and Africans and migrants to come in, then let's just do it. Like there's a clear logic that makes sense in the time of crisis for those who are bought into that program, right? And they've been fed that this program, because of the neoliberal orientation of the last 40 years, they've been led to believe and literally driven there economically in many respects to kind of want to because let's be clear, part of what Le Pen is offering is a form of a social democracy, but it's just social democracy for the French, right? If you're Arab, you don't count, right? If you're African, you don't count. But she said very clearly, we're going to restrict social benefits only to the French. There's a name for that called National Socialism. Like that is the program that she's articulating. That's the program Trump is articulating. That's the program that Boris Johnson is articulating, right? So we need to be very clear and discern all these different things and figure out how do we, dismantle the whole ship and not get lost on its tactical variance, right? And then, be clear about how we're arguing and then organizing. Because I think if we are more clear, we can move forces that appear to be unmovable. And I'm just bringing it up. Not that there's a lot of problem with this kind of conflation of the Bernie base. I'm just using it as an example, the Bernie base with the Trump base. But we need to analyze like why so many of those folks actually saw, they would rather vote for Bernie or Trump than they would for Hillary. That's something we need to seriously study and analyze. Like, what was that really about, right? And the base of it was kind of what were they promising to a particular social base economically, and how it was going to secure their particular position, right, within a society or restore them to a particular place. So, we need to really look at this, I think, in some fundamental ways, because that is the dominant direction that the system is going in now. And there's really, the liberals don't have no answer for that. Let's not lie to ourselves. They have none.
Yeah, you're so right on that. Just looking at the fact, I mean, y'all are so educational, and Kali, I've appreciated hearing you throughout this entire summit, sharing and being where you are, calling in, and it's late. I can see outside your door. It's late. So I know we're at the end of this session. So I have one little thing to pop in there, but I was going to send it over to you first, Mel. I'm moderating now. No.
Okay. Oh no, I I don't really. I mean, I have so much I want to add, but in the interest of time, I just want to go back to that phrase, "by any means necessary," and people think by any means necessary means like only guns, and it's like, no, that's literally by any means necessary, which could mean exploiting a moment of social democratic benefits. I mean, Biden's budget, there's stuff in there. It could be looking like forming mutual aid after a disaster to help model what community prepping and community survival could look like. I can only speak for my community. Kali can speak for his community. Each of us need to be thinking about what it's going to take. And I always like to shift that question, because a lot of activists like to think, what can I do? And that's kind of like an egocentric type of a proposition. Like, how can I feel important by contributing to the struggle? I like to flip that question and say, what will it take? Because when you think about what it will take, and you understand that it's going to take all of us, it's going to take communities, it's going to take organization, then you start to see yourself not as that savior complex, but as part of a piece, like a piece of the puzzle, among equals. And that's one way that we can start to dismantle those other oppressions that make I mean, and in that are all tied to power, as Nicola said, and start to materially help our communities in in a different way. So that's all I got.
Yeah, I appreciate that reframe, Mel, and y'all have given me so much to think about. One thing I was going to just drop in the chat for folks is just like a resource that I use in class to help people to unpack like different levels of privilege. Because I mean, even if we're thinking about education or we're thinking about like where we live, like access to resources in different spaces, access to outdoor spaces, like all these things are about like intersecting privileges in the environmental movement, and like a lot of ways that people are a lot of times excluded from environmentalism in the sort of dominant spaces, right? Because of the way that like dominant culture, going back to David's thoughts on like what is my culture, thinking about dominant culture and how that takes place. I just think it's important for us to be trying to like, yeah, as you're saying, like reframe how we're approaching the conversations, seeing the privileges that we all come to the conversation from, being able to own that, recognize it, and then be able to see how, going back to our central kind of conversations about like it's intersectional. It's not simple. There's so much history. There's a lot of different ways we're all coming together, and all of this contributes to where we're moving towards as well. So we have a future to create together, but we're learning, we're in the process, and that's pretty beautiful, and hopeful in my perspective.
Carla, you have any final words to close us out?
Let's make the damn revolution sooner rather than later. Other than that, I didn't talk too much.
We have a world to win. Y'all, in 25 minutes, we're going to come together for a closing session that begins putting art to work. So we've got several folks who are doing a cultural offering that is also going to serve as a conclusion to the overall conference. We've had an amazing time together. Thank you all. Thank you, Kali. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Mel. And thank you who participated live, or if you're watching this after the fact. Peace.